Once you have your perspective set, you need to finish it off with color or shading to really set the depth of these things. The diagonal lines, of course, do a nice job of creating some of that space, but you're going to enhance that space by shading. Whether you're using gray or you're working in color, the principles of shading are the same. All right, so the first step would be to establish your light source, wherever that may be coming from. I've set mine over here, so you can imagine that the light is shining onto these things from this direction. The face of the box where the light is hitting the most directly, of course, would be the lightest of the faces that you can see, and the face that's facing away as much as possible from that light source would be the darkest. So first off, looking at this one, for the three faces that I can see, if you imagine this light coming this way, it's hitting most directly faces that we can't see. But if we just focus on the ones we can see, this would be the one that it's hitting the most directly, while this is likely the one that it's hitting, like that the most amount of light is being kept from. So if I was working with a grayscale, let's just say a pencil, and I'm coloring this in, I've got my pencil just turned on the side so I can get a little bit more smooth coloring. I would color this face, trying to keep as consistent as possible, with one shade of gray, which I'm not going to finish doing right this second, but it would be that same shade all the way across, while this side here would be a step darker, and I need to just either layer my graphite or press down a little harder to achieve that. Get a little darker up here. And then this one, and can finish that as well. This one down here would be the darkest of my values, because this is what I'm establishing as the least amount of light actually hitting. So this would be the darkest of my three, where I've got a light, a medium, and a dark. And by doing this and keeping this shading consistent, because it's not curved, it's flat, by keeping this shading consistent, I'm going to help to establish my forms into this space a little bit more. Now, if you're working with another version of grayscale, which is where you actually can do some like pen and ink textural shading, you could do hatch and crosshatch marks. So this down here, my light's coming down, it's going to be hitting this side the most directly, and then these two sides is probably hitting, this would be my medium, whereas this would be my dark. So if I wanted to, I could just travel along this with like a Sharpie or a black pen, and I'm adding some value lines on here. I'm leaving quite a lot of white because I want to have that be my lightest side, whereas this one I'm going to pull those lines closer together so that they're filling in more of the space, and I can cross hatch them by crossing them back over themselves as well to help take that even a little bit darker. And then this side here is the side that I would want my lines to be the closest together so that it's my darkest side of this piece, which I'm not going to sit and do this all right this second. I'll finish it out here in a second. Now, if you're working with color, just imagine that that's finished. If you're working with color, this cross hatch with ink is a pretty nice way of working. Like if you're layering color on top of it, you could then add the color right on top of this Sharpie ink, and it's not going to bleed, it's not going to blend, it's going to keep those little bit of gray values that are going to then get mixed with your color, whether that's marker or colored pencil or even watercolors. You'll see that value through there. I'll come back and finish that in a minute. But if I were to take this pink and add this to all my sides, I don't need to change the color pink that I'm working with. I can just make it darker by how much of that black Sharpie is showing through, which I'll finish doing here in just a second. The last thing I wanted to show you is shading using colored pencils. So I've gone ahead and colored this box in, but I'm not done. So I've got the top of it where the most amount of light is hitting, and I allowed a lot of the white of the paper to show through here to make it a lighter version. And then I've got this same color pink here, but I used a little bit heavier pressure to fill it in, covering up more of that white, so it's a little bit closer to just the regular color of this color pencil. Now if you notice, if you come over here to this side, that would be the darkest based on where my light source is, and I've added that color to it, but it's really just kind of the same as this one. Now if I color it with heavier pressure, the issue there is it's just going to become a brighter version of this color. It's not really going to get darker. I think most people's inclination then would be to pick up a black and go ahead and shade that by adding black. But another option, and what ends up actually looking a little bit more realistic, is to shade with a color's complement. So if you think about the color wheel and you pick up the color that is opposite to your original color on the color wheel, and you shade with that color instead of black, or maybe in combination some with black, but I'm just laying this green over top of the pink, it will shade that pink some, but it's going to shade it in a more realistic way than just adding black, and it just kind of ends up with a little bit nicer effect. So 3 different ways of shading: grayscale with pencil, crosshatch and hatch with ink, but then adding color, or using color pencils to shade something in.